you guys are here. I'm so stoked for this morning. So before we get started, I have a question. So have you ever gotten a song stuck in your head? And I'm not talking about just normal stuck in your head, like for like 20 minutes or an hour. I'm talking about like for a day or like a week or like a month, like that song that just plagues your existence, that will not go away. And every time you think, and it's usually, like unfortunately, it's most of the time these songs that like are played repeat on the radio. So even when you think you got away from it, then you're like on the bus on your way to school, or then you're at work, or then you're like out, out at dinner or something, and that song just comes on. Like you finally got away from it, and then there it is waiting for you. So for me, this is one of those songs. So no matter what, I can't help myself. I just have to dance, and no matter what, it's like for the rest of the day, like this song is just going to be in my head. There's nothing I can do about it. And every time I think I get away from it, it's there. Like someone's listening to it, someone's making a meme or a video about it. Like it's just always there. So thankfully, like sometimes it is a happy song. Like it's that, 'cause I'm happy, all right, cool. And you just you're like walking to the bathroom in your own house and you're like humming and dancing and jiving. And like your family member's like, what are you doing? And you're like, oh, it's just stuck in my head. And then you start singing it, then it's stuck in your head, and then the cycle continues. So sometimes, though, the song isn't so happy. Like, you guys know the song from Titanic? Like that dismal, like super depressing song. And like, that's another one that I don't know why, but it just gets in there. Like, it's just lodged. It's like, every night in my dreams. Like, it's just up in there sometimes. So sometimes the song is happy and it's like, cool, like I could jive to this, like I could get down with this. And sometimes it's like, it just makes you want to cry yourself to sleep at night. You're like, this song won't go away. Now, sometimes, though, it's like it maybe isn't actually a song. Maybe it's something that someone has said to you, and sometimes that's a good thing. Sometimes it's a friend or a family member, that teacher at school that said, you are such a good writer. Like, have you ever thought about going into journalism? And in your head, you're thinking, I thought my writing sucked, and I never thought about it. But now that you said that, like, maybe this is something I could do. Or, like, you're like a freshman in high school, and your coach is like, hey, you should try out for varsity. And you're like, I don't think I'm that great, but all right, cool. Or, like, your boss tells you, like, hey, keep doing what you're doing, and you're going to get a raise. Like, you're going to get a promotion. Just don't change anything. Keep doing what you're doing. And again, you're thinking, like, all right, like, I didn't think it was that great, but apparently I'm doing all right. So sometimes these things that someone says to us in a really positive way then drives our behavior, whereas one point we thought we're sort of on the road to destruction, and now we're like, all right, hey, maybe things are all right. Maybe things are kind of cool, and I can keep that up. Like, that kind of motivates me. That pushes me. That gives me a little bit of a boost that I needed this morning. That gives me a little boost that I needed. Whereas sometimes it's the opposite. Like sometimes someone just like punctures that balloon of joy that you had. Like you're trying out for that team and the coach before you, it's like someone says to you, like even before tryouts start, like, you're terrible, don't even try. Like just don't even try. Just give up. Just quit now. Or like your teacher is like, no matter what you do, you are failing this class. Or your boss is like, hey, I hate to break it to you, but when the seasonal layoffs come around, you're first to go. So like sometimes someone says something to us, and instead of in the positive way, making us groove and jive and feel all good, like sometimes it just sucks the life right out of us. And it totally shifts our perspective, totally shifts our actions. It just shifts everything about our existence because it starts to drive us. So this isn't the big idea for the morning, but a point that I want to make is that what defines us will drive us. Whatever we allow to define us in ourselves and in our souls and in our spirits, that is what will naturally drive our actions, our behavior, our interactions, those kinds of things. So what defines us will drive us. Just kind of keep that playing in your head as we continue talking for this morning. So if you saw the video, or maybe you've seen like on our social media or stuff like that, like we're starting a new series today called MissUnderstood. We understand that there's an extra S in there, so if you were planning on correcting our grammatical errors, we already know. And it's intentional because we want to talk about what does the Bible say about women? There's been some newcomers to our church that have come up to Pastor Jason and said, things along the lines of, I kind of like your church, it's kind of fun, but I just don't know that women have a place in Christianity. Or like, some people will say like, I think the Bible was written by like a bunch of old guys that were written for kind of like for men. Like it's not really written towards women. It's not really written for women. Or, some people will go as far to say is like, I think God hates women because the Bible doesn't say anything about them. And we really want to challenge that a little bit. We want to fly in the face of that and see, okay, so let's see what it actually says. Like we can have all these ideas and floating around and all this stuff, but what does the Bible actually say about women? And so it's asking the question too, who are the women of the Bible? And so today we're going to be talking about a woman named Deborah, specifically in Judges chapter 4. And we're asking questions like, who is she? Why is she important? How did God use her? And then ultimately, how can we, as 21st century individuals and Christians, how can we learn from Deborah? So we're starting in Judges chapter 4, verse 1. It'll be behind me on the screen if you have the app or if you want to follow along in a Bible. So again, Judges chapter 4, starting in verse 1. The people of Israel again did what was evil in the sight of the Lord after Ehud died. And the Lord sold them into the hand of Jabin, king of Canaan, who reigned in Hazor. The commander of his army was Sisera, who lived in Harosheth-Hagoyim. Then the people of Israel cried out to the Lord for help, for he had 900 chariots. So this is Israel, and they are under Canaan, and Canaan has an army where they have 900 chariots, and chariots of iron, and he, being Sisera, oppressed the people of Israel cruelly for 20 years. So it points out that Israel again did what was evil in the sight of the Lord. This is not their first rodeo. This is not their first time screwing it up. They know the difference between right and wrong. They know what happens when they do wrong stuff in the sight of God. And God has identified Israel as his people, so he's given a certain way to live. And when they screw it up, there's a consequence for that. And so for them, the consequence in this case was that they lived in Canaan. Instead of living in their own place in Israel, they were living in Canaan, like their enemy's land, for a period of 20 years. So to paint that picture, it would be like us as Americans, like one of our, let's say, enemies, so to say, is like, let's say, Iraq. So it would be like us as Americans living for 20 years under the military rule of Iraq in Iraq. So we're not in our home. We're not in the place where we're comfortable. Our whole family, our whole crew, we're all over there, and we're under their rule. We're under their army. We're under their king. We don't really have our own say. We don't really have our own way. We don't really have our own stuff. We're totally under their people. So to really get this, so if you were born in 1999 or after, I see some young people in the room, this would be your entire life. You would not know anything different. You would hear stories of the old times when we were back in Israel and everything was cool, but you never knew that. Or even if you were born in 79 or after, this is still half of your life lived away from your comfort, away from your land, away from your home, away from the life that you built for yourself, away from the life that you'd want. So I know for myself, and I don't know if everyone is like me, but I know for myself when I read the Bible, sometimes little details like this get lost. Like I could read through like 3 chapters of the Bible and just like skim over all these details. And so I could read like, okay, cool, like then they were in captivity for 20 years. Okay, what happened next? Da, 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 da. But it's 20 years of time. Like this is not a short period of time we're talking about. We're talking about 20 full years that it took for Israel to face this punishment and to kind of get the point where now they're finally coming to a place where they're saying, like, okay, hey, God, like, can you help us out? Because this isn't really working for us. So we have people of Israel in captivity to Canaan. So for our example, it's like the people of us in America in captivity in Iraq for 20 years. And the problem here is that Canaan has an army of 900 chariots, and Israel probably had an army of about 0, because if they're under the military rule of another nation, the military rule of the other nation probably doesn't want Israel to rise up and take them over. So they probably would do whatever they could to keep their military tools and weapons and things like that as little as possible. So we have Israel, who's not really equipped for this battle, doesn't really know what to do. They've been suffering for 20 years, and if the suffering continues, it'll probably just get worse, and if the suffering continues, their army will probably just continue to grow. So this year they have 900 chariots, but maybe 20 years from now they'll have 1,800 chariots and 40, like their army is just going to continue to grow. So they're finally in a place where they're like, all right, God, like, what do we do about this? Like, we kind of get the point. We kind of screwed it up. But can you come help us out? We've been dealing with this for 20 years now. Can you come help us out? So that brings us to chapter 4, verse 4, which is where Deborah comes on the scene. So it says, "Now Deborah, a prophetess, the wife of Lapidoth, was judging Israel at that time. She used to sit under the palm of Deborah between Ramah and Bethel in the hill country of Ephraim. And the people of Israel came up to her for judgment. She sent and summoned Barak, the son of Abinoam, from Kadesh Naphtali, and said to him, 'Has not the Lord, the God of Israel, commanded you? Go gather your men at Mount Tabor, taking 10,000 from the people of Naphtali and the people of Zebulun, and I will draw out Sisera, the general of Jabin's army, to meet you by the river Kishon with his chariots and his troops, and I will give him into your hand.'" So this is Deborah. Deborah is described as a prophetess. That would be kind of her role. So that would basically be someone who's like God's mouthpiece. So they have a direct line to God. God uses them to speak to his people and kind of give them some instruction or give them some idea of what to do next, or give them some idea of what might be coming. She's described as a judge. This book of the Bible is called Judges. It's towards the beginning of the Bible. And for us, to put some context to this, for us, we use the word judge, and it's not good. Like, if I call you judgmental, I'm not being friendly. So but in this day, to call someone a judge, it was like, so they came to this person, and this was a prophetess, and we're coming to you, and we're saying, hey, like, help us out here from God, help us, like, it was kind of like a judge, but in the idea of letting someone finish out their sentence, so to say, or like kind of not letting them off the hook, but kind of saying, okay, like, this is what you've done, this is why you've done it, this is how you were sentenced or punished, and then this is what happens next. So they actually saw the judge as someone who was a good thing. This would kind of be like their saving grace. Like, I'm coming to you, and you're going to help us, with God's help, deliver us from this evil thing that we're doing, or like this bad experience that we're having. So for them, the idea of a judge was actually a good thing. And it's important to keep that in mind, because it's not like we're saying, oh, Deborah, like, she's so judgmental and she's all this and she's all that. Like, it's actually saying that Deborah was there to be a saving grace for the people of Israel. It also mentions that it says the phrase, she sat under the palm, which could imply that she lived a life of comfort. To say someone, if you're sitting, it means you're not walking. It means you're not running. It means you're not working. You're relaxing. And for her to be able to relax, she probably had some amount of financial means to enable her to do that she wasn't about her business. She wasn't out working hard and working the field and working this and working that. Like, she kind of was, so to say, taken care of, that she could sit and live a life of comfort. Maybe not 100% relaxation, so to say, but she would be living in comfort. And that becomes significant as we see the story unfold. So we see that she lays out the battle plans for this guy, Barak. So we have Deborah and we have Barak. So Deborah is the prophetess, and Barak, we can imply here, would be intended to be the military leader. He was supposed to be the guy who would step up, rise up, gather the army, go to war, and God would deliver them and everything would be great. But here's Barak's response, which is not so great. So Barak says in verse 8, so Barak says to her, "If you will go with me, Deborah, I will go. But if you will not go with me, I will not go." And she says back to him, she says to Barak, "I will surely go with you. Nevertheless, the road on which you are going will not lead to your glory, for the Lord will sell Sisera into the hand of a woman." Then Deborah arose and went with Barak to Kadesh. And Barak called out Zebulun and Naphtali to Kadesh, and 10,000 men went up at his heels, and Deborah went up with them. So look at the story as it unfolds. So we have Israel does bad stuff. They get punished for it. They come to Deborah. Deborah, what's the battle plan? What are we supposed to do here? Deborah lays it out pretty clearly. I mean, it's a big task, but go gather 10,000 men, meet at this place. They will come here, and you will win. Like, seems pretty self-explanatory. But Barak isn't really on board. So he says to her, like, you go, I'll go. Like, it's like saying to your friend, like, well, I don't really want to go and run that race, but if you do it, I'll do it. Like, kind of like, if you push me to, then I'll think about it, but I'm not going to just do it because I want to. I'm not just going to do it because I have the capacity to. So he says to her, if you go, I'll go. He's trying to punk out. And remember that Deborah is sitting under the palm. Like, she's living a life that would seem to be characterized by comfort. Why would Deborah go to war? Why would Deborah enter into the front lines of battle, risking her life, when she could sit where she is? Like, she's back here. Like, I would be thinking, you're a fool. I told you to go. I didn't say I wanted to go. I told you to go. But so she responds, though, and she says, surely I will go. Like, for her, it's like, dang, this is no problem. Like, you want to go, I want to go, let's do it. For her, she didn't have to do that. She lived a life of comfort, and especially in this time, a woman would not be expected. It would be strange for a woman to be on the front lines of battle for this culture at this time in history. And so she had every reason to say, no, I'm not going to do that. No one would really blame her if she said, no, I'm not going to do that. Whereas Barak had every reason to say, let's do this. As a guy who was charged with being the leader of the army, I mean, imagine that. Like, imagine if Pastor Jason came up here and said, like, hey, I'll have faith if you guys do too. Like, that's not a leader you want to follow. Barak is supposed to be the leader, and he's, like, punking out. He's being, like, timid and like, oh, I don't know. Like, I don't know if I can have enough faith to follow the plan that God just gave to me, literally laid out detail by detail, everything I'm supposed to do, but I don't know if I can do it. And so he's trying to rope Deborah in, and seemingly, if Deborah says, no, I'm not doing it, no one would blame her, but Barak could go back to the people of Israel like, hey, God came up with a plan, but Deborah's not really cool with it, so I'm not either, so we're not going to do it. And then what? Like, these people, like, this is like last-ditch resort. They should have been crying out to God the whole time, but now finally 20 years later, they're like, God, can you help us? And then if he comes back and is like, oh, sorry, guys, can't help you out. It's like, now what? So thankfully for the people of Israel, Deborah, unlike Barak, steps up. Barak looks at what God calls him to and looks for an exit strategy, whereas Deborah sees this as just another step in her faith, another opportunity to live out her faith. She steps up to lead. She leaves her life of comfort. She agrees to go into battle, even though she would never be expected to. So again, so now, like before we talked about that phrase, what defines us will drive us. We see that Barak is driven by his fear, and because he is unwilling to go into battle. Even though God already said, you're going to win. You already know how this ends. Whereas on the flip side, Deborah is living by her faith. So we have Barak. Barak, we could seem to believe, is afraid. And what would make him afraid? Maybe he's afraid of rejection. Have you ever been afraid of rejection? You ever thought about asking that person out, but you didn't go for it because you thought they might kind of reject you? You ever thought about trying out for that team, but you thought they'd reject you, so you never even tried? Thought about putting your name in the hat for that promotion, but you figured it wouldn't be yours, so you didn't even try. You feared rejection. Barak was charged with going and gathering an army of 10,000 men. But what if they don't follow me? What if they don't want to come? What if I tell them the plan and they don't believe me, and then they got to go to Deborah and they got to do this? What if it doesn't work out? What if I try and I fail? What if I try to go out in front of them and they're like, no, Barak, you're not cool enough. See you later. He could be afraid of failure. What if we go to battle and it doesn't work out the way God said it would? What if we go to battle and we lose? What if we have our 10,000 men and we all die? Well, now what? That was our 10,000 best, and they beat that. We're going to be in Canaan for the rest of our lives. There's no hope. There's no getting out of this. And we could see that he'd probably be driven by comparison, where you see Israel had 0 chariots, and you see Canaan had 900 chariots, and he's thinking in his head, there's no way that we can do this. Like, this is just not possible. It doesn't make any sense. God should just like strike him with some lightning. God should just come in and do it for me. I don't want to actually do this. I don't want to step up and lead. I don't want to step out in faith. I can't do this. Whereas on the flip side, we see Deborah, who for her living life in faith, we could say would be driven by hope. Hope for her is that God will follow through on what he has promised. God said, I will deliver you this battle. You're going to win. That's it. That's it. Like, for her, the hope is real enough that she can say, I believe, and I will go. And if the hope is real enough for us, then we can then go and say, I believe, and I will go. She's driven by love. She's loved by God. She understands that. She understands that her relationship to God is significant. She understands that God's love for her would not tell her one thing and do another. So her love for God is significant, and her love for the people of Israel is equally as significant, in that this would be a huge sacrifice for her, one that she wouldn't be expected to make, but she decides to anyway, and everyone would let her off the hook if she didn't go, but she loves enough to make the sacrifice. When we believe we are loved by God and we have love for those around us, we will be driven and we will be led to make those similar sacrifices. And she's also driven towards gratitude. So if you were looking at the Bible and you were reading this whole chunk, you'd have to read through all of Judges chapter 4 and also all of Judges chapter 5 to get the full story. This morning we're kind of getting a snapshot of what's happening with Deborah and what we can learn from her. But you'd have to look through all of that. So all of chapter 4 is all the details, all the nitty-gritty, how the battle plays out, all these things like that. And chapter 5 is described as, like, if you know how, like, when you're reading the Bible, sometimes there's like the little header, like the title of what that next section is. And it's titled as Deborah's Song. So Deborah then turns around after the battle is won. Spoiler alert, they win. And after the battle is won, she turns around and writes a song of praise to God. So this is the end of chapter 5. So again, reading all of chapter 4, reading all of chapter 5, we get to the end of chapter 5 where it's written. So this is Deborah's song of praise to God. So may all your enemies perish, O Lord, but your friends be like the sun as he rises in his might. And the land had rest for 40 years. So where once the land was oppressed, we now see that the land has rest. We see that Israel won the war. They defeated the military leader. They defeated the king. They defeated the people of Canaan, which was completely unexpected from an outside perspective. You look at, who are you betting on? If you're looking at this battle, who are you betting on? Israel, 0 chariots, or Canaan with 900? Who's your bet? It's Canaan, because it doesn't make any sense to bet on the lowly guy. But God steps in. God fortifies them. God wins the battle on their behalf. And Deborah's response is interesting because in some ways she could have a prideful response. Like, in some ways you wouldn't really blame her for saying, hey, Barak is like a loser and I'm super cool and I'm so great because I stepped up to lead. And look how good I did. And look why God chose me, because I'm so great and da-da-da-da-da and all this stuff. Like, she could really make a name for herself. She could really get out there and be like, hey, everyone should follow me because look how God used me before. God will use me like that again. You just follow me, people. Everything's going to be great. Just follow along my lead. Know how great I am. Praise me. Give me stuff. All this stuff. She could have responded like that. I don't think anyone really blame her because they went from 20 years of oppression, slavery, and captivity to 40 years of rest. So over that next 40 years, Deborah could just go back to her life made in the shade, and she could expect that people would just bring her nice stuff and be really kind to her because she was the leader that delivered the people of Israel. But that is not her response. Her response is to turn around and give praise to God and to say, God, you did this. Almost as if to say, I'm thankful that you used me to do this, but Lord, it was you who did it. It was not me who did much of anything outside of follow you. And our big idea for this morning is that faith in action inspires worship. When we put our faith into action, almost every time, in some way, shape, or form, God will show up. Something will happen that we could not do in our own power, as Israel could not defeat Canaan in their own power. And the only appropriate response when something like that happens is to worship, is to say, like Deborah did, God, you are amazing because without you, we could not have done this. And so we're really looking at we're looking at Deborah and we're looking at Barak, and we're looking at the two of them. And what's really the difference? The difference, like we've talked about, is that one is defined by his fear, and one is defined by her faith. Barak makes decisions based on his fear, which leads him to inaction. He doesn't want to go fight this battle. He does not believe that God will show up in the way that he said he will. He does not believe that the battle will be won. So he decides, essentially, to say, hey, if you go, I'll go, probably hoping that she backs out, probably hoping that he can go back and say, that plan didn't work, go back to square one, which would lead to Israel continuing to be stuck. If God doesn't choose to use someone else, well, what if that next 40 years, instead of the land having rest, what if they just stayed in captivity that next whole 40 years in suffering because Barak chose fear? Barak chose to be characterized by fear, to live in that. Sometimes we are so focused on how other people see us, how other people view us, our perception, our reputation, that we can't live for God because there's too much risk in that. Because if I talk to my coworker about Jesus and they don't like what I'm saying, then maybe they'll gossip about me at the water cooler, and then I'll be on the outs, and I can't have that because I really like this job. Or maybe it's at school, but you don't understand. If I tell my friends about Jesus and they think that I'm one of those weird Jesus freaks, they're not going to like me anymore. And I can't, how am I supposed to deal with that? I can't do that. I can't risk everything. And sometimes we look for that affirmation. We search all around for it. And sometimes we look for it in a way of, hey, I'm feeling kind of down. I'm feeling kind of low. Let's check out what's going on Tinder. Let's check out what's going on over here. Let's check out what's going on over there. Oh, maybe I could go on a date with this person. Maybe, hey, my roommates aren't home tonight. If I invite this person back with me and some stuff happens, nobody will ever know. So it's all right, because I need some of that affirmation. I need to feel like I'm worth something. We look to be defined by all of these different things that at the end of the day, you wake up that next morning, you go to work that next day, you go to school that next day, and you just realize that there's something missing. In your heart and in your soul, you feel like there's got to be something more. There has to be more than this. Whereas the flip side, you look at Deborah. So she is characterized by faith. Her faith leads her to action. Her action, through God's power and ability, leads to the people of Israel being liberated from captivity, being put at rest. Yeah, right. Put at rest. Thank you, Jay. Put to rest. In a place of rest, and that leads her to respond in worship. So we can see then that our faith is revealed through our actions. Our actions do not create our faith, but if there is no action, some could say there is no faith. If I said to you that I believe this bike can hold me, I believe that this bike could take me where I'm going more quickly than my feet can, but then I sit down in this chair, or you see me walking around town knowing that I have this bike at home, knowing that this bike is leaning up against the wall in my garage, but you've heard me say I have faith in this bike. Do I have faith? Do I have faith if I leave it against the wall? No, because my faith is revealed through my actions. So if my actions are not in line with my faith, then one could say that I don't have faith at all. It's this that reveals my faith. Getting up and riding this bike around town, then you would say, wow, I believe that this guy has that faith. Why? because it's revealed through my actions. For Deborah, that was going to the front lines. She did not hold back. She did not live in fear. And so an example from my own life is Starting Point. So who's been to Starting Point? Okay, so a couple people. Starting Point's pretty cool, right? Lori, pretty cool. Starting Point, loving it. So I've always kind of appreciated Starting Point. I've always thought it was really cool. And when my wife and I moved into our new house and we got settled, I said to Pastor Jason, hey, we'd like to lead a life group at our house. And he said, well, why don't you do a Starting Point, which a lot of times, like, you'll do a Starting Point and then that will sort of lead into doing a life group after. So in my head, I'm thinking, I really don't want to do that. But I decided, all right, whatever, I'll do it anyway. You know, he's like our pastor, like I'll follow the lead, like whatever. So they put it up. Graham does his thing, social media, put it up here, put it up there. And we get in some sign-ups and all that stuff. And then it's Monday night. So we're doing Starting Point on Tuesdays. And it's Monday night before day one. And 4 people had signed up. 4 people. And I've heard of other Starting Points where like 15 people signed up or like 20 people signed up. And 4 people signed up for our Starting Point. Now, I wish I could say that, like Deborah, I stepped out and I said, it doesn't matter, I'm going to the front lines, and I'm fighting for faith, and da-da-da-da, but that wasn't it. So Krista and I, my wife, are standing in our kitchen Monday night, and I said to her, why are we doing this? Like, what's the point? 4 people are coming. So, like Barak, I'm thinking in my head, what if we get rejected? What if nobody shows up? There's only 4 people. I'm thinking, like Barak, what if 4 people show up, but nobody gets anything out of it? What if we're wasting our time? I'm thinking and living like Barak, like living life in comparison, where I'm saying, well, I heard about so-and-so's Starting Point, that this many people showed up, and da-da-da-da-da-da-da. And I'm thinking like everyone else who's led Starting Point has told me, like, hey, not everyone who signs up is going to show up. Not everyone who shows up on day 1 is going to keep coming. So I'm feeling like, why are we even doing this? We're taking time away from our kids. We're taking time away from each other. We're taking another night of the week where we have a commitment. Why are we doing this? So for me, just like Barak, I couldn't look past my circumstances to see what God had for me. My own fear, my own doubt, my own inaction was here, and I couldn't see past it. So my wife, Krista, says, well, let's just see how it goes. Let's do week 1 and see what happens. So now that we're on like week 6, 7, something like that, out of 8 weeks, and now looking back, I can see that hope is real, because from week 1, we've seen so much growth in the few people who have come. It hasn't been a big group. It hasn't been 25 people, but we've seen so much growth in those few people. We've seen the love of God shine through us. We've seen our love for these people grow. We've seen their love for God grow. We're now driven in a way by love. And we're driven then to gratitude because we see God using us and our house and our family to do something we know we could never do. So one of Krista's ones, we pray for one here at Wellspring. And even though we say that all the time, and even though I say I believe it, we had 4 people signed up, and for me that wasn't enough. Like, I wanted more. I wanted more people. What's the point? Why am I doing this for 4 people? Well, so fast forward. So it ended up that 2 people showed up. 4 people signed up. 2 people showed up. One of the people who showed up didn't even sign up, but she came anyway. And she's a girl that had no faith background. Did not grow up in church. Had no faith background whatsoever. And a few weeks ago, she said this phrase, just in passing, just so casual, and it was so comfortable for her to say this phrase. She said, well, yeah, since I've had my coming to Jesus moment, as if to say, like, since now I have faith in Jesus. And she went on to say of how her life is changing because of that. She went on to say of how she interacts with her kids differently, and how she interacts with her husband differently, how she interacts with her coworkers differently, how she thinks about her life and her future differently because of this, quote, coming to Jesus moment. And when she said that phrase, she had no idea, but she was slapping me in the face with that phrase, because it hit me that she was the reason why we were doing this. It wasn't for 4 people, and it wasn't for 10 people, and it wasn't for 100 people. It was for that one. It was for that one person who needed to encounter Jesus in a new way. And also, it's been kind of crazy because 2 people showed up, so this was like week 2 or 3, and we get a knock on the door, and everyone who was planning on coming that we knew of was already there. So somebody knocks on the door, we're like, who is that? I don't know. So I open the door, and it's these 2 Mormons. They go door to door, and the girl says to me, hi, we're from the Church of Latter-day Saints, and we'd like to share a message of Jesus Christ with your family. And I'm like, oh, that's interesting. We have a Bible study inside. You want to come? So, so they've actually been coming every week since then. And it's been so cool and so crazy to see how God used our little bit of faithfulness to do something so big, to see these people from a totally different church, totally different background, come to us thinking they're going to minister to us and they're going to give us something, and that they would get something out of it. So they've been taking notes, they've been going through the book, they've been doing everything, and they have been encouraged, and they have been growing because of this. So we've talked about that what defines us will drive us. And it's our decision if that is fear or faith. If we, like Barack, and unfortunately like myself, are driven to fear, then we might not ever get to hear that girl say, when I had my coming to Jesus moment. We might miss out on the blessing because we're not willing to put the work in. If our fear drives us and defines us, then that is the direction our life will go. But God has so much more for us than that. So my challenge for us this morning is to step in faith and to respond in worship. So I don't know you. I don't know most of you. I don't know where you are in your faith. I don't know if this is your first time in church ever, your first time in a long time. I don't know if you've been coming to church your entire life. So I don't know what your next step of faith is. But you know what it is. There's something, I'm guessing, that's been nagging at you that you've been thinking. Maybe for you, your first step was coming here today. And maybe that's it. Maybe that's step 1. Maybe your next step is something more substantial. Maybe you've been in church for 45 years, and your next step of faith is to maybe take on someone that's younger than you to mentor them. Maybe your next step is to talk to that friend or family member about Jesus. Maybe your next step is to serve or to volunteer or to go to a life group. I don't know you. I don't know what your step is. But my encouragement to you is that you would pray to God to show you that step. And even if that's step 1, even if that step is, if you came with a friend today and you're not sure what all this stuff is about, maybe your first step is just asking them, what's this faith stuff all about? Tell me more about this. I'm confused about it. I think it's kind of silly. I think it's a little ridiculous. I don't know what to do with it, but I want to know more. Maybe that's step 1. Maybe step 1 is just gather some information. And when you get to a place where you realize some change has happened, or you realize something good has happened, that you would respond in worship to God, realizing that He has done something you could never do. I could never change this girl's life. I could never change any of your lives. It's only God who can do that. And through me, God used me to help change this girl's life, and now I get to turn around and praise God for it. So as we sing, we're going to sing again. The phrase is, I am chosen. I am not forsaken. I am who you say I am, God. My prayer for you is that we would be defined by faith, that we would be a church defined by faith, that we would be a church willing to step out even when it's scary, take that next step of faith, even if it's small, and that we would respond in worship.
Thanks for joining us today. If you'd like to stay connected, go ahead and subscribe to our YouTube channel, follow us on Facebook or Instagram, and if you would like to help us with our mission of igniting a craving for Jesus by relentlessly loving our community, you can find the link to give and all the other ways to connect with us down in the description box below.